just in case I start rattling on and it hasn't started. Good, thanks, Nathan. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Hope you're refreshed, ready for finance. I'll just check. I've got the key players. Hang on just a minute. I've done that silly thing where I'm working on one screen today, so I'm challenging my keyboard agility in moving about.
I'm here, Sarah.
You're here. Look, you're on page 4 of 4 for me. Right, there you are. Okay, great. Perfect. Right, thank you, everybody. So we are on item number 4. This is our month 4 position, our finance assurance report, and Heleth is here. So I shall hand over to you, Heleth.
I am here. Thank you, Chair. So as you recall at the last board meeting, we have a budget deficit position that we set at a 40 million deficit maximum, which was at Scottish Government request, with some significant risks in delivery of that position and some key actions that we needed to take. So month 4, we are reporting a forecast of around that 40 million deficit, which is based on the trajectory of the current expenditure, and that's in line with the original plan, and currently reflecting a level of confidence in the delivery of our cost reduction plans and delivering the break-even position for adult social care, which Alec quite rightly mentioned through the FRP meetings are very ambitious and challenging. So the month 4 position shows a deficit of 22.7 million to date, but with the savings and recovery actions agreed with Scottish Government to deliver, will bring this down to the 40 million deficit. And we are currently reporting a level of confidence that can be delivered those, but a more detailed assessment of the savings and recovery actions will be reported at the month 6 positions at the next board. We can see from the risk and mitigation slide that we do continue to have some unrealised risk within the position, and we continue to monitor and manage those. Some of the key ones for this financial year are probably the adult social care position, as been previously mentioned, workforce shortage and the need to rely on supplementary staffing, and the impact of the Health and Care Staffing Act, which are yet to be defined. And then the potential financial impact of our fragile services, which are ongoing. We do have some mitigations through anticipated funding as well, which are noted, and not all of those have yet been accounted in our position. So looking at the details of the services, the key expenditure themes haven't really changed significantly from previous years, with the biggest spend drivers being around those supplementary staffing requirements, drug costs and spend, out of area placements and SLAs, and delivery of our savings plans and targets. So there is quite a bit of detail provided there within our savings targets, the plans that sit behind them and the delivery to date. The savings target is 36 million, with 17 million of plans for delivery identified and 5.7 million of that delivered. Just to make a small note that you'll see within the information around the services that we have moved the budgets for vaccination that's gone from public health services into the HSBC. We haven't reflected that within the savings targets yet, so there is a small movement to be made there. From our capital position, our formula allocation is 7.3 million, and we have just over funding of 10 million for specific projects. So the spend coming through on that looks quite light at the moment, but we do have plans against the full allocation, and we do expect that spend to be coming through, and we're monitoring that for the capital asset management group. And I just wanted to add as well that we recently received an updated support and intervention framework, and that's around the financial considerations for 25-26, which sets out a bit more detail on the financial assessment through 3 subcategories. So these don't change the status of the board. So for NHS Highland, we remain at stage 3 for financial escalation, but just sets out some of the areas for concern and some of the subcategories. So the 3 subcategories are financial governance and leadership, financial management and control, and financial sustainability. And for NHS Highland, we've been deemed to fall within the financial sustainability subcategory. We've also had confirmation of a maximum of 40 million deficit support funding for this financial year as well. So if we do deliver our 40 million, we will have the offset, but for nothing above that. And we have got a paper coming to FRP this Friday to have a little bit more discussion around that. And then happy to take any other questions on the paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Heleth, and obviously appreciate that this gets discussed in detail at FRP, but it's a good opportunity for the wider board to ask some questions. I've got a couple of questions. I'll open up with my questions and I'll give time for other people to come in as well. I suppose the point I just wanted to make, we've had some discussions offline, haven't we, about that financial sustainability sort of subcategory, if you like, that we've been put into, and I think that's quite important, and I think our response to that is quite important. I think it's very helpful to know that they are assured around our governance structures and our management of our finances. You know, that's obviously good feedback for us to have, and that classification into the sustainability bracket, if you like, recognises the systemic challenges of delivering health and care where we are, and that's great. But I suppose what we have to take away from that is that that doesn't mean that there's nothing to be done. It just drives home the importance of why we have to reshape the way we do things, because it's not a management thing, it's not a governance thing, it is the shape and the shape of our services and how we deliver them. So I think it's just important to pull that out, because I think people will have had different reactions to seeing that wording. Okay, let's open up for comments and questions. Sorry, Heleth, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just say absolutely agree with that. It does give a level of confidence, I think, in the processes and systems that we've got in place at the moment. But that doesn't mean that we should take that for granted either. So we are looking at what else we need to put in place. We've already said throughout the meeting that delivery of our current savings targets is very challenging. So to make sure that we stay within that position of being kind of looked at for financial sustainability, we do need to make sure that we can continue to drive those savings through as well, and make sure that in-year governance is really tight while we work through the new strategic direction of how we make ourselves more sustainable for the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose, so I do actually have I've got a couple of quite detailed questions, which I'll maybe just go in with, as I can't see any of the hands up yet, so I'll just go in with those. A question, so it's on page 180 of the pack, so this is around the adult social care, and I noted in the narrative there was a bit around accelerating spend with Moss Park, and I just wanted to understand if that was spend that we had anticipated would kind of come down the line, or if this is kind of slightly unexpected accelerating spend. And I suppose my question is then quite broad. Is there something, obviously when we were doing all the work leading up to Moss Park, is there something that we didn't map out the way that we could have? Is there some learning we can take from that spending pattern with Moss Park that we might sort of choose to use somewhere in the future? I mean, hopefully we don't have another Moss Park situation, but you know, if something were to arise.
I think the comment within there, maybe it's not quite the right use of wording, but it's basically just recognising that we have been particularly reliant on supplementary staffing in Moss Park to make sure that we got it up and running. So I think that's what that acceleration is about. But that was factored into our planning. So we knew that when we first took over the home, we would need supplementary staffing in the first instance while we recruited and supported and stabilised that care home. So it's nothing exceptional above what we said. So as you see, it's specifically within the supplementary staffing slide. So it's talking about having to bring in that supply of staffing in the first instance while we review what's needed and we make sure that it's stable.
Okay, so that's helpful. I was, yeah, and maybe it was just a wording and the way I interpreted it. I slightly wondered if it was a completely left field thing, but that sounds like that was on the cards. Okay, Muriel, I'll bring you in, please.
Thank you. And a very left field one. I think it's possibly Richard, maybe best placed to answer this one. Do we take into account the excessive rise in energy costs and the impact that costs in the organisation as big as this? And the other question is regarding ongoing maintenance, because again, materials, everything associated with maintenance and service contracts and ongoing repairs seems to be accelerating at quite a rate. Have we factored that in as well?
Yeah, thanks. I can take that. Oh, sorry, Helen, do you want to go first?
She withdrew.
No, it's fine, Richard.
rapidly.
I was just going to take it off you. Through our budget setting processes, Muriel, we take all of that into consideration. So we actually seen the energy cost rise over the previous financial years, and our trajectory for this year is that we should see some reduction. So it's part of our savings plan for this year that those energy prices come down, and part of that is just through a contractual change that we had. So we expect those savings and reductions in energy prices to be delivered in year. So we do try to capture them through our financial planning process anyway, and we put assumptions around inflation based on what we know of the market, but we obviously track that throughout the year. But Richard will have more detailed explanation than me, I'm sure.
Yeah, apologies, I'm suffering from a sticky hand. I think lots of IT issues today. Yeah, so Muriel, as Hella said, we're actually going to be making some savings on energy production this year because of the way it's procured. So that's allowed for, but we do get an inflationary uplift every year on energy costs. So, for example, electricity and gas are down, but oil's gone up, so we're getting an uplift on that to cover that. In terms of the maintenance, for the kind of day-to-day maintenance, we have to carry that within our own directorates, and we do that by offsetting savings that we made from closing buildings and putting some allowance on there. But we have received additional money from the government to support us with the business continuity investment plan, which I've spoken about at FRP, and that has helped counter inflation, but inflation and construction's rocketing, so it's a good point.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, that was a great question, Muriel. Thanks everybody for updating us on that. Emily, I'll bring you in, please.
Thank you, and thanks, Celeste, for the report. I've got a couple of questions, one specific, one more general one. I guess the general one, we can all see at this point that it looks like there's a huge amount of risk in delivering that 40 million position. I know that we are regularly engaging with Scottish Government, but I guess at what point do we start having an honest conversation with them about the fact that that might not happen and what are the consequences of that? I think particularly when I read stuff around the adult social care break-even position and the note that that's contingent on all of the value and efficiency cost savings being delivered, that just feels like risk within risk, and you can start to see that that's, you know, going to be a real challenge. The more specific question is around, there's mention in acute that just over 600 grand is built in with respect to non-compliant junior doctor rotas. I wondered if that was always the case or if that's specifically as a result of the recent internal audit that identified issues with rotas. Thank you.
Yep, do you want to come in, Helen?
Yes, I was just trying to get to my mouse to move to my mic, but apologies for that. Yeah, absolutely. Emily can respond on both of those. So the finance position, even through the budget setting process, we made it really clear that our risks were fundamentally the adult social care position and then savings, but every board is faced with that challenge of delivering 3%. I don't think any of the boards are finding it easier this financial year, and we're all struggling through finding the different areas that we can do that and sharing best practice and sharing ideas and all that kind of stuff. We have, as part of our escalation, we have monthly touch points with government, the Scottish Government finance team, and we have quarterly face-to-face meetings as well. So we have this very honest conversation with them around that position. And as I said, that our intention is to do a more detailed review at month 6, where we'll flush out everything, our level of confidence around delivering the savings, where we're up to, all the recovery plans. So we had a lot of mitigating actions, some of them balance sheet actions that we'd put forward, in order to deliver the 40 million, a lot of those aren't played into our position at the moment. So we just need to gauge our level of confidence that we can still deliver on some of those. And the majority of them we should be able to. There's a couple around things like annual leave provision and things that we would need to just work through and make sure that they could deliver for us. So yes, we know there's risk in that position, but it's always been there and it's always been highlighted, and we have that conversation very clearly with government. So they're very aware of that. They still obviously have to hold their position that 40 million is all that we can afford as a system. So the system's bust if we go over the 40 effectively, and that's what they've got to support us. So it's important that we deliver it, but they are cognizant of the risks, and some of that risk isn't necessarily all sat with us, or the options to address it doesn't all sit with us with regard to the adult social care, but we're having that conversation with our council colleagues as well. The junior doctors compliance has been an ongoing issue. So within our last financial year's report, the figures were similar as well, may even have been slightly higher, and it was the other way around. The audit was triggered because of our compliance issues. That's why we wanted to dig into it to see if there's anything that we could put in place from a process perspective to try and improve that, rather than the financial position getting worse because of that audit report.
Can I just build on that, the first part of Emily's question a little bit? And in some ways it doesn't affect us. We, as you said, Helles, that is what we need to deliver. We're cognizant of the risks, and as Emily said, kind of the risks within the risks. But that is the position we need to deliver. I am just curious as to where we're sitting in comparison with other boards. I know that obviously other different boards will have different targets based on their own specific circumstances, but I don't know if there's any intelligence on how as a whole country, we are doing in terms of moving towards those saving targets within the NHS. If we particularly stick out or not, maybe we're kind of part of the pack and moving in line with everybody. I don't know if we have any intelligence on that.
We do. We government do share with us our monthly returns, so they provide us with tracking information on our forecast positions and how we compare with other boards. We also get information on saving trajectories rather than the to date position, and the majority of boards are forecasting that they'll deliver 3%, but that's the same as we're doing as well. So we've not heard any intelligence so far of any boards that are wildly off track with that, but we know we then have informal directors of finance discussions as well, and we do know that all the boards are struggling with it. So I don't think that we are particularly out of kilter with everyone else, and we're all trying to learn from each other. As I said, some boards have got really, really high savings targets around their drug spend, for example, and we can try and dig into why that is, whether they had an initial problem where they were seeing high costs relative to the boards, or is it just that they're doing something very different, and we need to try and share that learning in case something that we could do that's different. We get lots of information shared with us around things like drug switches and things that we could be doing, and to make sure that we're at least realizing and recognizing things like that really quickly. But it's definitely a challenge for everyone. I don't think that we're an outlier.
Okay, thank you. Alex, I'll bring you in, please.
Yeah, thanks. Just a follow up on Muriel's question to Richard about energy and energy procurement. I'm looking at the reduction programme, and the energy procurement was supposed to save £1 million, and we've saved 10% of that, up to a third of the year. So, how is it the old hockey stick bit? You're expecting, much more savings to come in the last quarter. Bearing in mind that we're just about to go into winter, so I would imagine that the energy use will be slightly higher rather than lower. And are we in a position nationally to make better contracts with the energy suppliers, or do we have to just deal with it ourselves rather than going into a national position? Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Alex, so we took the savings out of the budget yesterday. So at the next FRP, you'll see quite a significant change. I think it's about 700,000 that's out to this point in the year, or to next month. So it'll be sitting about there. We're keeping a bit of a contingency for winter, but the projections, we've based it on our last few years' assessments. So last year wasn't the worst winter. Year before was a bit colder. So we're taking an average. So we hope we've planned for that. In terms of the procurement, I think we are stuck with the national procurement. I don't know, I'd maybe have to take some advice on that and come back to you if we were able to go off. I know if there was local schemes, like we've spoken about local heat and distribution schemes, Scottish Government are really keen for us to look at those. And I don't think there'd be a problem with going to a scheme that was supported by Scottish Government. But in terms of looking for our own energy contract, I'd have to take advice and come back to you, Alex, on that one if we're able to do that. Maybe Held is able to.
Yeah, we utilise a national contract, Alex. So the energy contracts are negotiated on behalf of the whole of Scotland NHS. So they are probably the best prices that we would have available to us. We could go and procure something ourselves, but that would mean going through a full procurement process ourselves, and with no guarantee that we would get such good prices. The only place where maybe it's a detriment to us is where energy prices do start going down. It might not get recognised in the contract as quickly as if we had something a little bit more agile. But the flip side of that is we're probably protected if prices go up a little bit more as well. So there's a national procurement, and we take advantage of that national contract.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you. Interesting. Right. I'm not seeing any other hands up. So we were being asked to examine and consider the content of the report and take limited assurance at this time, which I think that's all we can do right now. Okay. Yep. Good. Thank you. So I'm going to move us now on to our integrated performance and quality report. And as is tradition, I'm going to hand over to David for this one, please.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. You will have a copy of the papers in your combined papers from pages 197 to 244. And of course, a reminder that these reports have gone through each of the committees that we've heard from this morning: staff governance, clinical and care governance, finance, resources and performance, and Highland Health and Social Care Committee. A few highlights for you, and then I'll be able to open it up for questions. The executive summary is on page 201. And if you allow me to use a Ryder Cup analogy, then the object of the exercise is to get more blue on the board than red. But I should hasten to add green is also good. So you are seeing a mixture of very good results and positive results, as well as areas of challenge. I won't take the time to go through all of the items, but just to pick out a few highlights if I can. CAMS is one of the areas of escalation for the board, and there's been a lot of work being done to recover that position. Our performance is reported at 85% of patients seen within 18 weeks, and we are seeing continued improvement. If you look at the detailed report, you'll see that the whole waiting list, as well as the longer waits, continue to reduce. And seeing some of the early results that go outside the reporting window that you're seeing for board, then that trajectory is continuing to improve. And we meet the Scottish Government on a regular basis. And I think we met yesterday with them, and the feedback from them is positive. So that continues to go in the right direction. I should highlight the performance around smoking cessation. It is the highest performance by quarter for the last 12 months. And I'm sure we'll get the opportunity to talk about that when we consider the Highland tobacco strategy a little bit later on in the agenda. If we go into the unscheduled care area, then delayed discharges remains to be and will remain to be a significant challenge to us. And we've heard a bit already today about the work that we're doing around that to try and improve that situation. It does have an impact on our emergency department access numbers, and again we've seen increases in both 8-hour and 12-hour breaches, albeit our 4-hour compliance is relatively stable at around 82%. And it reflects a very pressurised system, and we need to recognise that for the staff who are working within that. There was a question in the last board about the breaches and what period it covers. So the numbers that are reported are the numbers per month. So you'll see that within the charts themselves. Again, we've mentioned both our TTG and outpatients is a significant area of focus for us, both from a government point of view as well as from a board. As execs, we have weekly meetings to review these numbers, and there are a number of national meetings, particularly in relation to our trajectories to reduce those patients who are waiting over 52 weeks for treatment. We are ahead of our trajectories, more so in TTG than in outpatients. We've got to forecast performance at each specialty level, and while the aggregate position is positive, we still see challenges at an individual specialty level, which forms part of our oversight and scrutiny that we have on an ongoing basis. Again, the work that we're doing there is well recognised by Scottish Government, and the regular reports back from them is very positive. Cancer performance remains challenging, both in 31 days and in 62 days. We do get support from other boards in both of these areas in terms of performance, but recognise that both locally and nationally that remains a challenge for us. Psychological therapies, and I'm not saying that just because Alison's joined the board meeting today, was an area of escalation, if colleagues remember, with Scottish Government, and you'll see that the improvements that have been made by Alison and the team still shine through, and we've got very consistent performance, and it's good to see that we are second top of a performer within Scotland, and that's to be commended. Pages 30 to 34 look at our complaints and SER data. These are not so good, and indeed will require significant attention to turn those numbers around, and we are performing below where we would expect to. And then we've got falls data, tissue viability and infection control on pages 35 to 41 of the report, with no particular significant areas to report. And then finally, in pages 42 to 44 of the actual report, then the staff governance metrics are mentioned. We've seen long-term absence rates are slightly higher in July than previous months, but we are still seeing improved compliance in recording reasons for absence, as well as steady improvement in our training performance. And there is a summary that's been provided on page 240 of the combined report that you can read at your leisure. So with that, I'll bring my comments to a close. My colleagues are also on the call and will be happy to field your questions should you have some. Thank you. Sarah, go ahead.
I'll start. I was having a look at so there's the slide on screening. So a question for Jennifer probably. First one's just a really basic understanding. I wasn't sure that I knew what AAA meant for the screening uptake, but it looks like we're doing really well at that. So that was good. So you could maybe just tell me what that stands for. But I suppose to say, really interesting to see the graph on the right hand side where you know, seeing the difference in the uptake with the different inequality with the SIMD index figures. I thought that was really, really helpful actually, and something that I'm sure we'll be looking at in more detail, and it might be something that comes into the new committee work, I'm not sure, but that was really, really helpful. So yeah, just wanted to understand what the AAA meant, but also notice I think we missed, well, maybe we're not missing it, I'm not sure, the on the breast screening graph there was a bit missing in the middle, I thought. So don't know if Jennifer can pick some of that up.
Thank you for that, Sarah. So the AAA is the abdominal aortic aneurysm screening. Yes, it's a bit of a mouthful, hence it gets shortened. And yes, you're quite right. The team have been doing quite a lot of work across the health board in terms of being able to not only look at the overall uptake rates, but to actually draw out that differential uptake, because that's what we'll often find. So AAA is a really good example where if you plot who tends to come forward for the screening, and that you will see that differential across the different IMD, and yet then those who are in the most deprived areas tend to be the ones that present with the challenges. So it's one of the examples that often gets used to demonstrate how people in that we would categorize in that sort of way tend to be those who are least likely to be engaged in the way that we currently deliver that preventative early intervention type opportunities, and hence that then becomes a missed opportunity. I'm not entirely sure about the breast one. I will go back and double check and come back to you whether there was a difference in data, because I know that there have been some changes in the way that data has been recorded and reported. So I can go back and clarify that.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Alex, can I come to you, please?
Yeah, thanks, David. I've got 3 questions, one for Boyd, one for Louise, and one for Gareth. So I'll start with Boyd. In the level 1 SEER's declared status of 77 actions overdue, is that getting better or is that getting worse? And is that purely a resource-driven thing, or is it a complicated, some of them are too complicated and that's why it's taking long, or is it just the fact that the standard time isn't sufficient? For Louise, it's my question about the falls. That's not getting any better at all. Is that because we are now plateaued in that there's nothing else we can do to prevent that, because it's been sitting at a similar sort of area for about a year or so? And for Gareth, statutory mandatory training is now core e-modules. How did that work? What does that mean? Is it just that we're doing it on e-modules, or is there other bits that aren't included in the data? Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. I'll come to my colleagues in turn then. Boyd first, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So on the outstanding actions, the numbers, roughly speaking, static. It goes up a little bit sometimes when new SERs come in. A large amount of the 70 plus that you mentioned are legacy recommendations made some time back, which in effect were the recommendations were made in a way that actually they were not deliverable or achievable. The way they were written in, each individual report will generate a few recommendations, and so collectively what you've got is outstanding recommendations that just couldn't be done or that weren't reasonable. Sometimes the person writing the report will not have such an organisation-wide perspective. However, if the report's been approved and that recommendation hasn't been picked up as not being can't be completed in the way it's described, it then sits, as we haven't had a process really to unpick that and to alter it or to step it down because it's no longer relevant or just never could be done, or as sometimes happens, recommendations made by a well-meaning chair of adverse report review committee without realizing that that's not something that can be done across the whole organization, or it's not appropriate. It may seem appropriate for that case, but it's not going to be appropriate for how a whole system would be changed. I have, along with the nurse director, Louise, asked that our direct reports as a collective of professionals look at what our methodology might be to identify and to hold any decision going forward to step down recommendations, and also to, where possible, filter out those elements of a recommendation that might be worth doing and which would still be relevant and could be rewritten to be deliverable. And so that's an active piece of work, but it does take a bit of time to do, and it will take an appropriate process, which is why they sit as they are at the moment, because we haven't really got process. How do we stop it happening again? We've definitely tightened up on our approval processes, and again, nurse director and I have been active with our direct reports in getting measures in place to make sure that only those things that can be achieved and are appropriate can be ratified, and so there's a little bit more questioning of recommendations to make sure that it really is something that could be organisationally relevant and organisationally deliverable.
Thanks, Boyd. Louise, can I come to you with regard to the question around falls?
Yes, absolutely. And the answer in terms of can we do more? Certainly we can, and all of the areas are trying very much to do that, because we shouldn't accept that the position is the position. We have to try and improve, particularly falls with harm, because there will always be a degree of people who fall. There will always be people that are more vulnerable within our setting, particularly where we've got a high number of people in delay, because they're not necessarily in the right environment. So if people are in an acute hospital, when ideally they'd be in their own home type setting in a care home, there is a difference in terms of the physical environment they're in and how we manage that. So there's other aspects that we need to do that will have a knock-on positive effect on the reduction in falls. So as we hopefully reduce delayed discharges in the coming months, then that will provide some support for our falls reduction too. Another aspect, certainly recently I was visiting one of the community hospitals, so I was at Migdale, and we were talking about falls, where we've got a number of people that walk with purpose and are around the ward all of the time in a very meaningful way. We give them the opportunity to be able to have that freedom, but there is that falls risk. So we have to look at environments and making sure that people have safe spaces to walk, and minimising the risk of harm when people fall. So there's numerous aspects to this. We're also looking at it from a multi-professional point of view, because often there is a particular focus on nursing staff, but there's a real lens on it from how our AHP colleagues can assist, particularly with giving the environmental changes. So there's a great deal of work going on in the background. This report doesn't necessarily sufficiently cover, and maybe we want to put more detail into that in the future as to exactly what we're planning on doing and how we're looking at that in each of our different areas. I would say we do have variations, so certainly a lot of work in Elgan and Bute has led to some significant falls reduction in one of the hospital sites there. We've had challenges in Caithness, so we've had to look at it in different areas as to the different challenges.
Thanks, Louise. And finally, if I come to Gareth around the statutory mandatory training.
Sorry, Alice, could you repeat the question? I didn't quite catch the question.
Yeah, sorry, what it is, it's on the training matrix page, and it talks about core mandatory e-learning completion rates. Now, I would have thought StatMan training would have been a bit more than that, but I'm not seeing it. Or is that what you're now referring to it as?
I don't think anything's, well, certainly nothing's changed in terms of what we're reporting, what's included in that figure. So there's a suite of statutory and mandatory training e-learning modules that all staff have to complete. Yeah. So that hasn't changed.
So in terms of statutory and mandatory training, is that the only thing we have, e-learning module? We've got no in situ, we've got no on the job, we've got nothing physical that happens other than that.
So at a national level, probably easier to answer this in the context of what's happening nationally. So the purpose of the statutory management training at national level is to secure. We've now agreed. I'm on the national group around this, 9 modules that will be universally adopted across NHS Scotland, and they'll be consistent, so we'll be able to have transferability and passports for training, which is good. And they are defined as the things that every single member of staff should know, and yes, they are delivered through e-learning. There is also a range of profession-specific training that we deliver, and there's quite complex matrices that go with that in terms of the things you need to do within your job, family and role, which picks up a degree of e-learning, but also on-the-job training as well. So I suppose it is the majority of that statutory mandatory is done through e-learning.
Thank you.
I think just maybe to add as well, Alex, there are 2 charts related to training that are on the page. One is around the e-learning part, and secondly, it's related to the practical training completion. That is the classroom-based training that goes alongside for certain aspects and for certain staff. So it covers both of those. Thanks, Alex. Jerry, can I come to you, please?
Thank you, David. I've got a few points which I'll pick up, and I'll probably just say Jennifer should get herself ready. I picked up the 55 to 97 on smoking cessation, that tremendous improvement. And I just wondered, has anything specific happened in the last quarter that's led to that, or is it just a factor of numbers, which is possible to be, of course? I did pick up in the commentary that went along with it. There was a comment about the high incidence of smoking among young pregnant women who were having extreme difficulty reaching, and I just wondered what the issues were in there. I've got another comment in relation to outside of, I think, primary care, and it's probably North Highland primary care. Outside of North Highland primary care, where ABIs is really, really disappointing, and I'm particularly picking up I think in Q1 of 25-26 we've only got 4 in the antenatal setting, which seems really, really, if we talk about really grabbing prevention opportunities, that seems to be one. Only a couple more to go. On DARS, I think it is worthwhile, on the Drug and Alcohol Recovery Service, I think it is worthwhile picking up and just noting our deteriorating performance in terms of waiting times. And I do have a little concern there that might not be, there might be a geography skew in there as well, because I'm pretty sure Teresa said the vacancies in the team were skewed towards one particular area. So I'd be interested to know how we're managing referrals across the patch. And I suppose my last comment would be, and it's probably more an observation, is delayed discharges just seems to trundle along, and we don't seem to have any real change upwards or downwards really in the number. But I'm not sure I would have a great deal of confidence in the trajectory, which is included there, taking us down to 150 towards the back end of the year. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Jenny. For the first couple of questions, I'll come to Jennifer, and then for the last 2, I'll come to Arlene. Jennifer.
Thank you. That's a figure that we have been trying to get under the skin of to see how that may therefore plot out going forward. I think, and I also think that reflected within this will be some missed data, which is also referenced in the report in terms of how do we do that follow-up piece through a variety of different providers. So I think that hopefully answers that question. In terms of then the pregnancy one, we're not unique in that regard. This is something that you'll find nationally, probably, if you follow any of this agenda. It can be quite a challenge to engage with women when they're pregnant around the smoking. But what the team are piloting, and what you may or may not have picked up through the upcoming item, is an attempt at a pilot to see if we can engage women proactively through some sort of voucher scheme. There was initially, when that was initially brought out, and I'm showing my age, but probably about 15, 20 years ago, there was some mixed evidence about whether that actually was effective in going beyond simply bringing people in, but then they would quite quickly drop out again. But that evidence appears to have shifted slightly, and so there is an attempt to try that on a pilot scheme for the Highland Health and Social Care geography in the first instance, because the route through is slightly different for Argyll and Bute, and we'll see where that takes us on that. In terms of the wider settings and the alcohol brief intervention, that is an interesting one, because when you look at it, on the one hand, we're looking like, well, we're doing quite well on the ABI target, but most of that heavy lifting, as you're quite rightly saying, is coming through the primary care elements. So I guess the question we'll then have is, how do we then link up with some of our priority groups? So if that's a really useful vehicle, what can we learn from that in terms of how we then start to approach it from an antenatal perspective? But also, I guess I would need to just go back and sense check with the team that number of 4, how does that relate to the numbers that you would actually need to engage with them? On that, in terms of whether, what's the number within the total group coming through antenatal that would require that sort of intervention. So I guess I just want to sense check on that rather than misrepresent what that figure actually is showing us.
Thanks, Jennifer. Arlene, do you want to comment on both DARS as well as delayed discharges?
Yep, so in relation to delayed discharges, we have agreed that as a partnership we're going to do a focused piece of work in the next few weeks before we head into winter in relation to the delayed discharges, because Jerry, you're absolutely right that the number doesn't appear to have changed. It's slowly creeping in the wrong direction. So that piece of work will be looking both at the individual circumstances of each individual person, as well as reviewing our own processes. And we've already put in we're recognising that there are some difficulties in around about perhaps the escalation, that if somebody becomes stuck, we're aware of it, that they're stuck, but then for workers on the ground, where do they then take it to say we're stuck? Who's going to help us unstick that? So we've put in some processes around about that. We have noticed from the data that we were looking at on Monday that there has been a spike in the last couple of weeks in relation to AWI assessments. That doesn't fit with our local kind of knowledge and understanding. So at the moment, I've got workers at the process of looking into that to try and figure out what that's about, and therefore why, because we put in mitigations very recently in the last sort of 6 months in relation to our AWI, and that had come back down again. So what has changed is what we're trying to get to, but we are certainly looking at that over the next few weeks before we head properly into winter.
Do you want to comment on drug and alcohol recovery service?
Oh, apologies, Jerry, I missed that question. Remind me.
Just the growth in the waiting times, Arlene, and if I recall correctly, I'm sure Teresa indicated that we had geographical issues in our recruitment, and it's how we were managing referrals on an equitable basis. So we didn't have a big waiting list over here and nothing over here.
Yeah, and I think from the conversation that we had earlier on in the board was the recognition that DARS work very hard in order to manage both their waiting lists, and particularly like everybody else, they do have difficulties with recruitment. And what they then do is that if there is a particular issue, they share the waiting list around. So, for example, there was a particular issue in recruitment in Easter Ross. And so what we did was, when we realised that that waiting list was growing, was that we shifted a worker for kind of periods of their week from Inverness up to Easter Ross in order that they could help manage that out. It's that it kind of flattens it out across Highland rather than allowing it to be peaks and troughs everywhere. We have other workers who will do some remote support from Caithness, for example, where they've got a very solid DARS team with a lot of experience in it. So they will do some remote support for our colleagues in Lochaber and Skye, for example, when their lists start to go up. So we balance that out, and they do that operationally.
Thanks, Arlene. Thanks, Jerry. Joanne, can I have your question, please?
Thanks, David. It's one for Jennifer again. It's with regard to the preschool vaccinations. Jennifer, I just would like to see a bit more detail with some timelines and targets around the improvement work within the next report, if that's possible, please.
Absolutely, that's not, sorry, that's absolutely fine. Arlene and myself are working closely on that, because obviously within the structure that Arlene is involved in much of the implementation, but we are making good progress in terms of getting into the preschool elements in particular, as that has been the focus of the discussions and getting that clarity and agreeing on the model in terms of primary care. So we can absolutely bring some more information and detail back on that.
Thanks, Jennifer. Muriel.
That's a curveball for you, David.
I wouldn't expect anything else.
We talk a lot about winter pressures, but do we ever record data? We saw a lot over the summer period where A&E was full and on various levels of challenges. But across Highland, do we record the impact of our tourists on our health service? And is that data that we are able to use at all? Because it is a big, or it's perceived to be a big issue.
There is some data available with regard to tourism. It certainly can be identified from that point of view. I suppose, on the other hand, our services still need to be able to cope with people who arrive in that unplanned way. And there undoubtedly is an impact, and it's generally seen most prevalently within our RGHs in Caithness, as well as in Fort William and Belford. And I know it has a direct impact on their performance. And recognise too, particularly in Fort William, there are a few national events that take place over the year, which tend to be of a high risk nature, which can then add to attendances. Catherine, I'm not sure if you wanted to add any more to that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, David. That is why in Highland we never feel the benefit of it not being winter, because we have a surge of people coming up the A9 to enjoy the Highlands, which is great, and bring, tourism and trade to the Highlands. But actually, we do need to look after them. Many of them are older people that are on, bus tours. So we can quite often have a fair length of stay from some of the people that actually attend and become unwell whilst they're here. I would just add, David, that it's not just Fort William and Oban and Caithness, but actually Regmore takes a lot of that impact as well. There's a fair number of events in and around the Inverness area. But we see that as our standard business in terms of response and take that into consideration in terms of our planning.
Thanks, Catherine. Neil, you have a question for us?
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks for the IPQR. I guess I've got a comment first, which is going back to the ABI results. I'm just going to bring that up on mine. So I note that the good results overall, 90% delivered in primary care. Presumably that's all general practices, and that means that sort of 90% will be GMS, and that's therefore going to be through an enhanced service. And I think really the point I'm making is to just hold that thought for when we get to discussing tobacco and vaping in the future. Then a question or a couple of questions. One is there's a new cardiovascular enhanced service targeting SIMD1 and 2. Are we going to get some results reported from that, in due course? Because again, it's an enhanced service which hopefully should deliver in our strategic and national objectives of population health. So that's just a question, are we going to see that? And the second question, which is slightly different, but goes back to vaccinations. significant differences in the rates between Highland, North Highland, and Argyll and Bute. Is there any work looking at why that is so? Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. I'll maybe come to Jennifer, who's very popular today, and you can maybe talk to the ABI as well as vaccination uptake, if that's possible. And then I'll maybe come to Arlene if she's aware of the cardiovascular enhanced service. If not, perhaps Boyd may have something to add there. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I think that the ABI was more for noting as we go into the next item. Yes, so absolutely we can pick that up as when we get into the tobacco control. But I think it does really clearly show the role that primary care can and does play in terms of that wider prevention and early intervention as part of a population health approach. So and that is a highly acceptable way for many of the population, and especially when we're looking at it in terms of rurality and some of the challenges that people have. So and I guess that then links into the vaccinations element in terms of there are different models at play across the two geographies, as you will be fully aware of, and hence why we have gone down the route of looking at it through a hybrid and the requirement to really look at what's the delivery mechanism that will best meet the requirements of our population. And that's the most important thing, is how do we learn from other areas, including Argyll and Bute, because clearly they share some of the challenges around that rurality and some of the areas of deprivation, and how do we then bring that learning into the context that we have here. So it is part of those discussions of looking primarily at what is it that our population need in order for us to ensure that our population get the vaccinations and access the vaccinations that protect them, and how then can we then develop the right model, target operating model, as we would say, in order to deliver on that. So there are different approaches at play, and yet we're also doing some work with Argyll and Bute, trying different approaches. Again, it's about learning and thinking about the context and what works with the different systems in operation. So hopefully that adequately answers your question.
Thanks. Jennifer, and thanks, Neil. Boyd, did you want to pick up the enhanced service question?
I think I don't know if I've quite caught it correctly, but in terms of what's in the IPQR, there's just thousands of different metrics that may come in. So probably there's decision making about what is or isn't in the IPQR that comes to board, and these are board papers. I think when you get into specific metrics that are quite niche, these may be reported in a different place. For instance, may come to Clinical Governance Committee, or may come into Health and Social Care Committee or IJB level, and some of the more operational meetings that are below that. It is always important that there is overview of anything where services are commissioned, to see what the output of that commissioned service is and what material difference it will make to the health and well-being of our population. But as to whether that specific one would make it all the way into the board papers, hard to say. There's usually quite a competition among the many other things to come in. I'm hoping we can get a lot more of that kind of thing into clinical governance. These would be very good examples of the kind of metrics that we would be wanting to see in that particular board governance committee.
Thanks, Neil, for your question, and we certainly will take that away in terms of consideration as to where that is, and if there is available data, I'm happy to share that after the meeting if that's an area of interest. Okay, thank you for all your questions. Just before I hand it back to the chair, I should have mentioned at the beginning, you'll see that through the IPQR formatting, you'll see the letters OIP that are marked against the various metrics, which I'm sure is going to lead us nicely into our next topic around our operational improvement plan. And it's just trying to make the connection between that and the IPQR, just so that you're aware of it. But thanks, Sarah.
No, that's great. Thanks, David. And I was going to pick up on that point as well. Clearly, you know, it's a Venn diagram of performance reporting. So we had hoped that by kind of marking the bits in the IPQR rather than creating a sort of a separate, an artificially separate report, we hoped that would be helpful. And obviously, we'll talk about the OIP in a minute separately. So I just want to touch on something though, and it links back to what David said at the beginning. So I think first of all, obviously, when we're doing this bit of scrutiny through the board, we are focusing on the areas where we feel there could be improvement. So, and that's right, that's what we're here to do. But I think it also is worth recognizing what David said at the beginning of the item about that balance. You know, yes, there are areas where we are experiencing challenge and can seek to make improvements, but there are also a number of areas where we have made significant and sustained improvement, and we're seeing good performance as well. And that's really welcome. I'm aware that we are behind schedule, and I'm tentatively opening this can of worms, but we had for a long time proposed limited assurance around the IPQR, recognizing, you know, we're trying to cover everything with one paper, and that's almost impossible to do, but it was kind of to recognize that there were some areas of challenge, and also recognize that we maybe didn't have our reporting and our strategic approach right around everything. My feeling is we don't have to bottom this out today. My feeling is that this feels much more like moderate assurance to me now. I think when we started a while back on our IPQR journey and things were not so certain, limited seemed like the right place to put this. But I think given the progress that we've seen, the sustained progress we've seen in a number of areas, and I think the robustness of the reporting, I'm curious to know what people think about moving that to moderate assurance. So yeah, I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts. Stick a hand up and let me know what you think. I'm happy to be disagreed with. It's just I think it's good for us to consider it. Alex.
Yeah, I agree, Sarah. I think it is moderate assurance. I mean, the data's there. We can see it. More importantly, we've got the data over quite a long period of time now. So, and that's what gives me that I'm happy to go up to moderate assurance now, because we can look back, we can look at trends, etc. So yeah, more than happy to do that.
Thank you, Alex. Emily, what do you think?
I think, yeah, I can understand the desire to acknowledge the progress, and I can see that as well. I guess I'm looking at it in conjunction with the finance report, where we're basically flagging limited assurance because there's no way with the system as it is that we're likely to meet our targets. And I guess with the IPQR, I would say the same is true. So just really a consistency question. I don't think I disagree as such. I'm just wondering, because, you know, I've previously asked about what are we getting assurance on exactly and trying to get some degree of read across. I think that's really my question.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you. Jerry?
Yeah, I'm probably in the same place as Alex. I would have no difficulty moving the level of assurance up. And it was funny enough, I was actually thinking about the level of assurance as it relates to the finance report as well, because I think all the points that Alex made in relation to IPQR, we've actually got in finance as well. The only issue we've got is we have this elephant in the room of the 40 million pounds hole. But I keep going back to, we deliver on what we say we can deliver to, and that to me is the key question. So I think there's an interesting debate to be had, because I would 100% agree with Emily that we have to be consistent on what we apply to each report. Thank you.
Okay, can I maybe make a kind of a compromise suggestion then? So my suggestion is that we move this to moderate assurance, but let's take an action offline, because I think you're right, Emily. There's something about the consistency. What do we mean? Now, obviously, there's work happening behind the scenes that Dom and his team are doing about, you know, governance and assurance and things like that. And if we're doing as everything we could be doing. So I wonder if people are comfortable with this, I would suggest we put this to moderate assurance right now, but we're going to take an action away and make sure that we can have some kind of way to get that consistency, Emily, that you've just talked about, and make sure that we've got absolute clarity around that, and we can pick that up through the work that we're doing with Dom and his team around the governance stuff. That's one suggestion. Alex, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, I was going to say the FRP that we're having on Friday, this Friday coming, is one where I think we can have a discussion about the finance assurance side of things and what we can do with that. That would give us the consistency between those two parts, but it may well be that there's others we need to look at as well.
Okay, that would be helpful as well. So if we do that, and bearing in mind that if we feel next time we meet, if we're deeply uncomfortable with that, we can go back. Just that's sort of where I think we're sitting at the moment, if people are okay with that. Okay, good, thank you. So we'll take that action away as well. Great, that takes us on to item number 6. This is the operational improvement plan, which, as David said, flows beautifully out of the IPQR. I'm going to invite Kristen to speak to this, please.
Everyone, thanks, Chair. So yes, it's nice and seamless from the IPQR. So as you all will know, back in June, the 3 products, national frameworks, were published. We were given the Operational Improvement Plan, the Service Renewal Framework, and the Population Health Framework. And the Operational Improvement Plan is probably the more short-term of the plans, with the other 2 being more medium to long-term. The development of the Operational Improvement Plan really followed on from the development of our annual delivery plan, which obviously represents a far wider set of objectives for all of our services within NHS Highland. But the OIP really focuses on those key policy areas which are fundamental to our transformation and service improvement plans. So what we've done is we've had a matching exercise to link the deliverables of the Operational Improvement Plan with the annual delivery plan, and you'll see within Appendix 1 just that mapping and the RAG status of them. The key sections within the OIP are in 4 areas. First being the improving access to treatment, second, shifting the balance of care, third is the access for digital and technological innovation, and fourth is prevention. So within the access to treatment, you've heard a lot today really about that additional investment that we've had, looking at our commitment to reduce the number of people waiting over 52 weeks for treatment by March 2026. We've done significant work in creating a planned care dashboard that allows us to track and map the planned activity versus the actual activity at specialty level, and we are using that to monitor our performance weekly, and there are chief executive and executive team meetings weekly as well to focus on that. And we're also making sure that we are looking at any patients that are tripping over into the 104-week wait category as well. This is also true for our cancer services within the board, and we are looking at our trajectories around waiting times for the 31 and 62-day target, with key focus areas in our specialties where we're having significant challenge, and that's around urology and our breast pathways, but there are plans in place to support that going forward. And as I say, that is going through the same chief executive assurance as well as planned care. And that also picks up on our diagnostic delivery as well. We've discussed as well a lot today our shift in the balance of care and the unscheduled care portfolio, and the significant work that's been ongoing there with CFSD, and that work has commitments made around our frailty assessments, development within the Raigmore Hospital, and the development of hospital at home services, as we've already touched on earlier. We have received funding for this as well, so there's trajectories and liaison continuing with CFSD around that, and the key focus areas for that will be, as you can expect, is our 4, 8 and 12-hour waits within our emergency departments, delayed discharges, and our hospital occupancy with length of stay within it. We've also got a commitment to deliver against our development of the Open Eyes digital system to support our community glaucoma services, and we're working across the board and with NHS Orkney in how we are going to develop the Open Eyes functionality within that to support that. Also, apologies, I've got a helicopter coming over my head at the moment in Campbelltown, so hopefully you're not picking that up. Another key focus area is improving access to digital, and we've touched on is again the work within Raigmore and the creation of the operating theatre scheduling tool that's being expanded to general surgery and links with other initiatives. And there's lots of national work ongoing with regards to the Digital Front Door project. We've also got work ongoing within this for digital dermatology and type 2 diabetes. And it's just worth noting that the genetic testing that's within the OIP is not actually being delivered by us, but we are working closely with the East of Scotland Regional Genetics team to work on these pathways going forward. Also within the prevention space, there's significant work within the programme board collating all of the current activity that we are doing, move to the curate stage, working with services to look at opportunities within our new board strategy and to build on our current strategy within Together We Care. It's been discussed this has been discussed obviously at length. It's linked through our IPQR as well, as David already mentioned. We've discussed the reporting time scale for IPQR, the OIP and the ADP. There's obviously lots of things to tie in together. So the schedule within the paper has been agreed at FRP, and we'll stick to that and continue to report through that. And as I've already mentioned, within Appendix 1, you can see the updated dashboard with the colour brag status there, just to provide that detail around where we are. And these are linked through our current outcomes within the Together We Care strategy as well. So hoping that this provides more assurance to the board around that kind of crossover from the annual delivery plan, IPQR, and the commitment that we've made around the OIP. But happy to take any questions. Thanks.
No, that's great. Thank you, Kristen. And yeah, you're right. You've helped make sense of that kind of that Venn diagram that I talked about of performance reporting and monitoring. But it's helpful to see this in this way. Okay, happy to open up any questions or comments around the operational improvement plan that Kristen's just reported on. Alex, please.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Kristen. That's good, and we've seen a lot of this at the FRP, and that's fine. The only red that you've got on your in Appendix 1 is related to feedback from general, I think from sort of general practice area. Is that a contractual issue, or is it just a matter of you haven't got the data yet, or you're expecting it to come within a few weeks? Because it said spring that it was supposed to have started. Has it started, or is it just a matter of, we need a bit more resource to get the feedback from it?
So I actually don't have the detail on that. Sorry, Alex. I don't know if Boyd or Arlene are able to support me in that.
I'll come in maybe if that's okay. So a large proportion of general practice is independent, and there have been national discussions around data sharing agreements to allow information to come in. So while it's been included, and there is a hope that soon there will be data extraction to help facilitate this kind of information that we're discussing today, we're not quite there yet. So it's watch this space, and that will apply to other boards. It's not Highland specific or Argyll specific. It's a general phenomenon. We do have sight of the data coming out of 2C practices, but they're very much in the shining minority, and the vast majority of practices are still independent businesses that have a contract and don't have an automatic data sharing agreement for this kind of operational data as yet.
Thanks, Boyd. Karen, I'll bring you in, please.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm probably going to ask a question that I've answered myself as I've been thinking about it, Kristen, so that might be good. I was thinking about the National Care Service Advisory Board, I think it's called, and whether we've got a sense of what might come out from an operational improvement perspective through that route, or guidance and recommendations and all that good stuff. But is that likely to sit more in IJB and Health and Social Care Partnership? Which of it and how will it kind of fit in? Fiona's put her hand up, that's great. Into sort of from an integration perspective, I'm always interested in where we do the integration bit. So I just was interested, thinking about that. This is very health driven at the minute, it feels like. I'm just interested in that kind of side of it. Thank you.
Luckily, we have our very own Fiona Davies, who sits on that board. So straight from the, I was going to say not from the horse's mouth, that doesn't sound great, but straight from that table, Fiona can give you some intelligence.
Yes, thank you. And just in time before I had to head off, I think you heard that that notice earlier, so you got me just in time, Karen. So the National Care Service Advisory Board is currently in an interim status, and so the board has two responsibilities. One is to give advice, and one is to make recommendations for the formation of a permanent or substantive board, which is due to happen in 2026. In regard of its function to give advice, it's clear within its terms of reference that it can give or should be giving advice to ministers, COSLA leaders, health boards and integration authorities. So that's IJBs, and obviously that encompasses the lead agency arrangement within Highland. As yet, the board has only met on a number of occasions and is still in the kind of forming stage. So it hasn't yet issued any advice. But it's working up to being in a position to give advice. Whether that advice is formed and given to all four of those bodies simultaneously, or whether it's targeted to particular parts of the system, I think is yet for the board to agree. I suspect that, but I'm speculating that any advice in its initial or interim form will be for all of those bodies to consider. Given the mixed range of responsibility for social care that I think our earlier lengthy discussion rather drew out, that it's a complex landscape in which many fingers are in that pie, if I can use that metaphor. So I think it will start to gear up and issue that advice. And obviously I can update the board, given that I sit on it, this board, about that board, as it comes through. But the sensitivity, I think, in terms of these plans is around that political leadership and the relationship between COSLA and the Scottish Government. And that will be one that all of us that are around this will be keen to support, to get that balance of narrative about what people need in their places, which requires obviously the close working of local and national government and policy and implementation. Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona. So we shall watch that space, both from this board and Karen from the IJB perspective as well. I'm not seeing the other hands up, but I just wanted to ask, obviously, the work that is going on through the OIP, as we talked about before, is kind of it's not like it's brand new stuff that we weren't already doing. Much of it sits within the ADP, the IPQR, so that's fine. But I'm just curious as to whether there's been any learning that we can take from our approach to the OIP. How we've gone about organising ourselves and progressing work against the OIP. Has there been any learning that we can take from that and roll out more broadly across the organisation? Thanks. And I don't know who wants to take that. David.
It's a very good question, and it's not an easy answer, to be honest. I think there's two reflections. One is the way that the OIP was formed was unusual, in that it was done as we were developing what was the regular cycle of our annual delivery plan. And therefore this came as a formal request halfway through that programme, or actually towards the end of the programme. Some may even say after we've submitted. So what's on the OIP would normally have been individual specific requests for us to have as part of the ADP, if that makes sense, because we always get requests when we're forming our annual delivery plan to say that, you know, certain areas want certain things. But this most specifically was, this is what ministers in particular are going to be focused on. So it's been quite an unusual element to it. As you say, it contains then quite a mixture of content, some that very much is in our wheelhouse, very much that we expected, very much what we're already engaging in, and that's absolutely fine. There are one or two programmes, interestingly, particularly around the digital space, that I may describe as quite niche, but are of particular importance to ministers. So those are aspects of it which are slightly unusual, actually, in terms of the request. But what we've tried to do as much as possible, given that we spent a lot of time in developing an annual delivery plan, is try to merge the two things together as we roll them out, so that these become part of the ask, recognising as far as the reporting is concerned, it takes a special level of reporting that government will be interested in. But what we didn't want to do was specifically create a different industry or plan for these requests, if I can describe it that way, but recognising the importance to track. Kristen, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I totally agree. I just think that added focus in those 4 key areas, we definitely have seen that kind of mobilisation of the teams, and you know, certainly from my team's point of view, that focus is definitely seen. You know, the performance has definitely improved, so that has been excellent. What I put my hand up to say really is that there's just a bit of a grey area now going forward around what will the request be coming forward. I've asked what that will be, because November really is when, as a team, we would be getting the ADP guidance out, we would be mobilising, starting that going forward. There's not really been any noise around what to expect. So there's just a bit of a question mark for us around that. So we're just going to continue kind of on the way we are just now, but the progress that we've made around the reporting, I think, will help be a good foundation for us moving forward, hopefully.
Okay, no, that's helpful. And that's a really good point you made there, Kristen, about what, yeah, we sometimes forget, don't we, that the planning for next year kind of starts now, and actually that guidance or even a steer is very helpful if we can get it. So we'll see. We shall await with bated breath as to what the instruction is. But you're right. But we will continue nonetheless, even in the absence of a clear instruction. We'll carry on doing what we know needs to be done. Okay, no, that was really helpful. Thank you very much. And we'll bring further updates, as you said, Kristen. You've got that laid out in the timetable, going through FRP. So that's where we'll get some updates going forward as well. So we are being asked to note the content of the report and take substantial assurance on the interface between our ADP and the deliverables set out within the operational improvement plan. Are we all okay with that? Yep. Okay, super. Right. What I'm going to do, haven't made up the time yet. What I'm going to do is we'll take item 7, which is winter preparedness and surge planning, and then we'll take a lunch break after that. So, Catherine, I'll invite you to speak about winter preparedness and surge planning, please.
Thank you, Sarah. And hopefully colleagues have had the report and had time to read and consider the report. So I'll just give a brief overview and introduction. As we've already touched on today, we tend to not see winter as the only time that we have pressures. We have pressures throughout the year. But in terms of preparing for winter, there is a formal process that we go through. and it's almost an audit of where we are across all of our services. So you'll see the report lays out that our audit this year has covered Argyll and Bute, the Health and Social Care Partnership area, and also the acute system within the north. It also covers primary care, social care, mental health, acute services, and workforce and capacity issues across all of these areas. So in terms of taking you through the report, you can see that in terms of that comprehensive review that we've undertaken, it has highlighted certain areas that we need to strengthen, and we are taking those areas forward. They mainly relate to workforce and areas that are particularly in remote and rural areas where we have small workforces to support delivering service. So we're thinking about our resilience in terms of that. The report also outlines that we need to ensure that we have our vaccination arrangements in place and that we understand what a surge capacity is across all areas. And we've already again talked about those things today and how we are attending, particularly in terms of that vaccination and ensuring that our population is as protected as it possibly can be. The report also links very, very closely to the urgent and unscheduled care work that's ongoing, and I've included within the report the areas that we're focusing on at the moment. We've identified some key areas that I would like to bring to the board's attention. So those areas are areas of particular focus where we are trying to put some improvement and some change in terms of the way we're working. So I mentioned earlier in the meeting today, same day emergency care and ambulatory care. And so this is about trying to treat patients without having to admit them to a hospital bed. And there is an initiative that's focusing on reducing 0-day length of stay. So we're not admitting people into a bed for less than 24 hours. So we're looking at how we manage that. Our AHPs at the front door, I've also mentioned that earlier today. I'm happy to take questions on that. Our frailty assessment area is really positive and will complete our frailty pathways within the acute setting. We're starting this in Raigmore and also, as you can see from the report, in Cowell and Oban. Hospital at home, we are bringing that into the Inverness area and also to Oban to ensure that we can deliver as much capacity through hospital at home as possible. It's also important for the board to recognise that we can only go at a certain pace in terms of introducing a new service because we have to think about the quality and the safety of bringing in new patient pathways. However, if we can avoid people being admitted to hospital, they are less likely to be picking up infections if we happen to have an outbreak. And we know as we go through winter, that's going to be very important. There's mention here of the Flow Navigation Centre and how we're planning to do work to strengthen the flow navigation and the out-of-hours response model, ensuring that patients are directed to the right care at the right time, and by improving access to advice and alternatives to hospital attendance. That work at the moment is being led clinically, and a clinical leader that's been appointed to support the urgent and unscheduled care work through the Health and Social Care Partnership has been linking through. So we've got really strong joint working across the system at a clinical leadership level, and that is trying to look at how we can join up our SDEC and avoidance of admission pathways with the FNC work. And then finally, there is the discharge to assess work. So that is running a pilot in the East Ross area where we know that we have some significant challenges in terms of access to capacity, this work should actually help us to reduce requirement not only for acute care, community hospital care, but also for social care. So we're really working through impact assessment, and the report proposes a level of moderate assurance, and I'm happy to take any questions that the board may have for me. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Catherine. This was a great report, and I think, you know, and a lot of us had conversations offline about it's not just winter preparedness, and as you alluded to earlier on, Catherine, you know, we have different pressures all year round, and so I think it was right that we picked up that, you know, it is winter preparedness, as of course we should be doing, but it is also surge planning, and so I think that was a really helpful context, and I enjoyed reading through that, so that was really good. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll open up. Does anybody have questions or comments around this? And I'll come on with mine in a little while. Alex, I'll bring you in first, please.
More a comment, to be honest, than a question. The staff vaccination numbers continue to be stubbornly low by the looks of it, and certainly by your report. You're expecting, you put a lot of focus on it, but you don't actually sound. It sounds to me like you're not expecting it to get any better. It's more a case of, can we do more? But I'm not sure if we can, between the, you know, staff awareness, the leadership pushing for it, the peer-to-peer vaccination, all that kind of thing. So that's it's disappointing, but I can understand it. My question is more about the somewhat surprising decision that we're increasing the age limit of the vaccination for COVID up to over 75, I think it is, this year. Is that part and parcel of the surge planning that you've got, that you expect a little bit more of the COVID influence to come through the patients that are coming in, because of the fact that there's an aged group now that are not being vaccinated that previously have been? Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. So in terms of the staff vaccination numbers, we certainly within Rigmore, we've just started, and across the acute system, we've just started to roll out the internal vaccination. So we're hopeful that we will encourage staff as much as possible to uptake that. There's a lot of initiatives that are taken forward. The vaccinators internally are very creative. They go around finding people and will vaccinate you if you stand still, sort of thing, if they can possibly get to you. So, you know, it's all done with good humour, and they are out and about. In terms of the population vaccination question, I'd like to defer to Jennifer on that one if I could, because it's not my subject matter expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And I guess what maybe is also helpful to be aware of is that we actually, according to the 24-25 data, which is obviously what we would have the most recent, we did fairly well compared to the national average, but you're quite right, it's far from what it needs to be. I may well be bringing in others into this conversation around the approach to deciding on the categorisation and who has access to, and that is usually set nationally by the JCVI, and it is usually down to the population benefit overall, as well as sort of that relative uptake and the nature of the condition. But Boyd, I wonder whether you wanted to come in and whether you've got anything more that you'd want to add to that. But it's following those sorts of core principles, and they would be the ones nationally that would determine the which categories, which criteria are used in terms of population eligibility for all vaccines.
Probably don't need to add anything, Alex, unless you want a wee bit more detail. Yeah, it's a four-nation approach. It's very data-driven, and it links to, you know, evidence. So it's not a local decision.
No, it wasn't a case of the question that maybe I didn't ask it properly. It wasn't a matter of why was the decision taken. It was more, have we accepted the fact that that's happened? Therefore, we might get more people coming through with COVID because of the vaccination now reduced, even though nationally they're expecting us to be more resilient to the COVID strains that are out here. Thanks.
I'll just come back on that. That's okay. I think the evidence that they're using is showing that where in the early times of COVID, it could be quite a serious and indeed quite unpredictable illness where two people of the same age and approximate fitness, habitus, etc., might respond differently. Now that we have a mostly vaccinated population, and now that the virus itself has been through a number of different reinventions or reiterations, what you're seeing in terms of effect on population at individual level as well as collectively is different. And so it is thought to be impacting less on individuals, and the reason that they've picked an age group cut off is because there'll be evidence that shows that there is benefit above a certain age because of the overall frailty that those people don't have that baseline fitness, and they may not continue to have the immunity that they would have had previously. You're less able to maintain immunity as you achieve a greater age. And so the science is right behind that decision, and some of that is looking at the impacts on healthcare systems as well as the health impacts on individuals if they do get. So the virus isn't so much the problem as the well-being of the individual and the holistic total health profile for them for that age group.
Thank you, Boyd. That was actually really helpful the way you've explained that. Okay, good. Emily, I'll bring you in next, please.
Thank you, and thanks, Catherine, for the report. My question is about how much we do in terms of sharing best practice across the two different areas, because it does read in most cases like two separate reports that have been combined. And I obviously know there's nuances to each area and how it tackles things, but ultimately, presumably the challenges are quite similar, and a lot of the actions that are being taken in one area might well be useful to another one. So I just wondered, with seeing that quite a lot of it is separate and there's not a lot of read across, like how much is done in terms of sharing approaches and best practice that have worked well in one area with the other area.
Thanks. If I just come in on that, obviously as a current urgent non-scheduled care executive lead for the health board, my responsibility is across the whole health board on behalf of the executive directors group. So we have what's called an urgent non-scheduled care portfolio board, where everything reports into, including what's happening through Argyll and Bute. Now, obviously, Argyll and Bute have their own governance arrangements that's well understood by the health board. But what we wanted to be able to do was learn from one another in both the North Highland area and the acute system, and also for Argyll and Bute to learn from North Highland as well. And we're all connected through the Centre for Sustainability and SG to see if we can learn from what's happening in other areas across Scotland. So that all comes together through the Urgent and Unscheduled Care Portfolio Board. Now, at the moment, Argyll and Bute are ahead. They introduced Hospital at Home last year, and we haven't introduced that yet in North Highland. So we're just on the cusp, which is why Argyll and Bute are able to increase their bed base around Hospital at Home faster than the North Highland area are. So we have been learning from Argyll and Bute for the North, and Argyll and Bute are looking at what we are doing also in terms of some of the frailty work that's ongoing. So that cross-fertilisation is really important, and we've a system and a design of SROs as well that feed into that, and professional leaders from across Argyll and Bute and North Highland. So I agree it does read separately, but that what I was trying to do was give a sense of the depth and breadth of detail that is being taken forward. But we are joined up and working in an integrated way across the health board.
Thanks, Catherine. Janice, excuse me, Janice, I'll bring you in next, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Catherine. Great report. I just wanted to understand a wee bit more about the volunteer deployment, what that is. Is there room to grow it? Is there enough resources to support it, that kind of thing? But I just wasn't sure what it was.
So we do have a volunteer resource manager who will recruit volunteers for us and work with us to look at, you know, how can we build capacity with the volunteer workforce. There are obviously, as you'll understand, Janice, limitations to where we can deploy that. But we also have a lot of people that are keen to volunteer for us. So I think the part that you've identified relates to Argyll and Bute volunteering in particular. And I would need to defer to Evan if he's able to come in on any detail in relation to that for the Argyll and Bute area. But certainly we feel volunteers obviously have a lot to offer us, and there's a real keenness to become engaged with us. So I can give you more detail, and we could get some update from the volunteer manager, Janice, to give you more information in relation to that. But I'll bring Evan into the specifics of Argyll and Bute. Thanks, Evan.
Thanks, both, and thanks for the question, Janice. Very similar in Argyll and Bute, to be honest. So volunteering is managed across the Highland Board area, and the volunteer manager has a member of his team that deals specifically with the Argyll and Bute. And in fact, we're just meeting in a couple of weeks to kind of discuss how we sustain and improve that. Yeah, very similar situation in terms of the management of.
And just by pure coincidence, I chair the volunteering advisory board for NHS Scotland. There's a fun fact. And there's work nationally as well, and this is a slight tangent, but it is interesting. So the profile of volunteering in the NHS in Scotland has changed. For lots of different reasons, but primarily because of COVID. So there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes nationally. It's driven by a team in HIS, because Scottish Government gave it to HIS. So there is kind of broader work looking at where volunteering sits for the NHS in Scotland going forward, because it's a bit different now. And there are some really interesting conversations going on about, does that need to shift in terms of the traditional idea was that you'd maybe have volunteers in wards in hospitals, but actually if we are trying to shift into more community based models of care, do we need to think differently about where we would have opportunities for volunteers? And there's also lots of stuff about, you know, looking at links with employability and other bits and pieces. But it's a great question, Janice. So that is interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Steve, I'll bring you in next, please.
Thanks, Sarah. I wasn't sure if my hand was up or not. It's not showing on my screen. It's just a really quick question. I mean, I think this is a really good risk management plan for winter, but my question is at 3.3 in terms of the financial impact of this and how it might be one for Helith, but, you know, what do we factor into our projections? I mean, are we sort of projecting for a mild winter and a mild impact and hoping for the best, planning for the worst? I'm not really sure in terms of how we plan for the potential financial impact of a really bad winter period. And I'm not sure if you've got the answer for it, but I'm just interested in what it says there in terms of looks like it could be a fairly big impact if it's a bad winter.
Yeah, great question. Catherine, do you want to come back in on that?
I'll have a go, and I'd be happy for Helith to come in terms of her financial expertise. But you know, we do have a data-informed approach, so we use data to drive everything that we're doing, but including, you know, seasonal trends, admissions, length of stay, etc. So whilst on the ground in a resource-limited environment, that can feel incredibly pressured at times. We can't just suddenly open up masses of capacity. So the actual variation in terms of the impact on finance will be limited, and it will be dictated by the planning and the decision making that we take in advance, because it wouldn't be safe for us just to suddenly open up, acres of capacity. And to be honest, Steve, none of our buildings have that type of capacity that isn't already busy delivering some type of service. So I think our experience would tell us that whilst there will be an impact, it usually is managed within the resource that we take and plan with. Hopefully that helps explain some of that. But I see Heletha's got her hand up, and she's definitely better qualified than I am to talk about finance.
Hi, not at all, Catherine. I think that what you said is perfectly reasonable. So we try to plan for it within trajectories and things, but our budget setting is largely setting around people and workforce, and we're not great at putting that variation in throughout the year. But historically, we've had additional funding through government around winter planning and be able to put in surge capacity, etc. But I think what they've tried to do going forward is more giving us our urgent and scheduled care allocation, planned care allocations in advance, so we can plan for it, and it should be utilised within that. So we should be planning for some of that seasonal variation through the different funding streams that we have.
Thanks, Heleth. I've got a couple of questions, but they're quite sort of mini things, so we don't necessarily have to pick them up today, but they were just bits that popped into my head maybe for future conversations. So the one, and it was just a very small comment that I picked up on page 260, where it talked about, it's talking about primary care. And it was just a bit of wording which I think maybe alludes to sort of wider context. It says, all GP providers are being reminded of the importance of ensuring anticipatory care plans are in place in the winter briefing letter. And I suppose it just got my brain thinking a little bit about, some of this is about, I suppose, the way that the GP contracts work and how that works. But then, and in this instance, we're talking about it in relation to winter preparedness. But it did make me sort of think a little bit more broadly as we move forward, as we're thinking about how we want to, refresh our strategy, how primary care is a real pillar of that, and our GPs are, a fantastic asset. But it just got me thinking. I just wanted to check that I had picked that up right. That is sort of within their gift or within their sort of control about those anticipatory care plans. But Evan, I can see you want to come in.
Thanks, Jay. Happy to come on in on this. I suppose that probably the language is probably not as good as it could be. I don't think practices need any kind of reminder really of the importance of anticipatory care plans. They're the people that see frailty, its progression, what we can do to kind of support that day in, day out. I think the point here is more the engagement with practices to ensure that they are included as part of a whole system plan, rather than what has historically been the case, kind of been somewhat outside of our planning and our engagement and our communication. So I think probably the impact of reminding practices about anticipatory care plans is less important than the communication around, we have a winter plan, you're a key part of it, how can we work together to make that whole system approach better?
That makes a lot of sense and makes me feel good. Okay, lovely. Thank you for that. I'm not seeing any other hands up. So just thank you, Catherine, and colleagues. I think that was a really, really helpful report that we've had. And I think as through the discussion, we've talked about winter, but we've talked about other things as well. And I think that's really some helpful context for us. So I'm just checking my notes. We were being asked to note the content of the report and take moderate assurance around our winter and surge preparedness. So is everybody happy with that? Okay, lovely. Right, so rejigging a little bit, but let's take half an hour for lunch. I will see you back here at 1:30, at which point we will talk about the tobacco strategy. Thank you.